Listen up. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this podcast belong solely to the podcast participants, and not to any participant's employer, organization, committee, or other group or individual. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. You know, for fun. So lighten up and enjoy. Well, Stomping Jen.
Yes.
Welcome to the Soft Serve podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Episode blah blah blah.
Yeah, we don't know.
We're no longer announcing episode numbers within the episode.
Right.
That is a strategic decision we have made.
That's right. We're all out of order here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to do episode blah 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 today because on it we have Lexi Walters Wright, the owner of High Five Books in Florence, Massachusetts. And as per the usual, I have lots of questions about this that we are going to ask Lexi.
Great.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Do you have questions?
I always have questions.
You do. Okay, let's go.
Okay.
Well,
You did
I
it.
did it again.
The Soft Serve Podcast.
Creamy, delicious ideas without the creepy truck. All right, Stomping Jen.
Maybe by episode blah, 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 you'll remember
I know.
where you moved the buttons to.
After we had a newspaper article published about our show, the professionalism has plummeted.
That's right.
I can't even get my buttons straight. Well, I want to say hello to our guest, Lexi Walters Wright. Hi, Lexi.
Hi, friends. How are we tonight?
We are doing pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm going to go with a solid A.
Excellent.
Good, good. Well, we wanted to have you on because you run a bookshop and own a bookshop in Florence, Massachusetts called High Five Books. And our daughter, Space Unicorn, has declared you her best friend.
It's true.
And so I have not been to your bookstore, High Five Books in Florence, Massachusetts, but based on that proclamation from Space Unicorn, I can only imagine that it is a special, special place.
Wow.
So I am wondering if, before we talk about the bookstore, you could just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. My name is Lexi Walters Wright. My most important job is I am the parent of a 9.5-year-old. He's a super cool, really, really fun dude. I am the partner of another super cool, really fun dude. And I've lived in the Valley for almost 15 years. I moved up here just like everybody else from New York City. And I was here for about 13 and a half years, almost 14 years before I opened the bookshop. So it was a... it's been a totally wild ride for the last year and change, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
Now, can you tell us a little bit about your bookshop, High Five Books?
Sure. So High Five Books is a very small, we're about 1,000 square feet, children's bookstore in downtown Florence, Massachusetts. We share our space with an art school, Art Always, that has been in business for about 18 years. And Art Always is very popular among the high school and underset with, our teacher, Lindsay, has been teaching kids art for 2 decades. And while she was teaching kids for 2 decades, I was in publishing. I was in primarily parenting publishing in in magazines and websites. And so, she was honing her craft, learning how to teach kids how to tap into their creative endeavors. And I was in Des Moines, Iowa, and New York, working in magazines and on websites, primarily around pregnancy and parenting. I have a background in child development and in journalism. And when I moved up to the Valley for a job, it just became clear that things were changing in the journalism world. And I was watching all of my colleagues have to rethink their careers after multiple decades of working in publishing. The publishing landscape really changed. And so I had a really good idea to go back to graduate school and get.
Sorry, I'm laughing because both of us have had that idea.
Yeah, it's a really bad idea. And I got a master's of information and library science in hopes that someday I would be able to sort of tap into my very favorite thing in the world, which is young adult and middle grade literature, and primarily graphic novels. I'm relatively new in the last 15 years to graphic novels and to comics. And I really went through this deep love affair about 15 years ago with like the entire canon. And so I went to graduate school for a degree in something that I wasn't entirely sure what I was ever going to do with, and then promptly did nothing with it. My son was born.
Was there
go ahead.
Was there something about the experience in graduate school that ended up leading you to the bookstore and the creative space?
Yeah, for sure. So primarily in publishing, I've been an editor. And one of the things that afforded me was a lot of access to really great writing and really great recommendations around kids' literature. And so while I was in graduate school, I started reviewing young adult literature myself. And that was really fun, but it was also not enough. I wasn't really able to I could, write a review of a book and then hopefully somebody would read it, but it wasn't the same as actually like handing a book to a kid and sort of watching that unfold happen, which I think is, what I now have the privilege of seeing a whole lot. I in library school got a real taste of the idea that every book has its reader out there. I think all of us can remember at least one book from when we were smaller that really was like a lightning rod for the things that we cared about, or kind of opened us up to a different way of thinking or being or feeling. And that's really, I think, super, super powerful. And we're in this wacky retail landscape right now where in order to have that experience, you either have to be hopefully in a public library. If you're fortunate enough to have an indie bookstore in your town, maybe you've developed a relationship with somebody who can, kind of give you that book that unlocks this big feeling for you. But for the most part, we've sort of gravitated toward this model where we have to be in a strip mall, at a Barnes and Noble, on our own, paging through stacks and stacks of things, like hunting for the one. And it feels, and at the time for me, it felt really depersonalized. And that's a bummer. It's a super bummer, because I really do think that every kid has a book out there that's going to really turn them on in a super cerebral way.
I remember what mine was.
What was it?
Pet Sematary by Stephen King. No, I'm not joking.
I totally laughing at you.
I read that. I snuck it out of my father's bookshelf when I was 12, and I read it, and I latched onto that. How you were describing how it kind of opens your mind or blows your mind open, and that's what it did to me. Like I remember that. Did you have one, Lexi? Did you have a book that did that for you?
I had a genre. So I'm a kid of the 80s, and there was an author named Lurleen McDaniel who in the late 80s wrote a genre of teen romances that had devastating illness and death at the center of it. So like 2 Months to Live was the title of one of them.
Oh, wow.
These super melodramatic teen romances. And this, of course, is like before young adult literature really existed. It was the sort of very beginning of when writing was being tailored specifically to young people. But I just remember thinking that like, I can read about girls my age doing things that I do, and that's like magic. That feels miraculous. I felt seen, and it was transformative, and these girls had like crushes and boyfriends, and that was really scintillating. And I was like 8.5 reading about this, and
That's so
it was
funny.
it was magical. It was really magical.
I have so many
What about
thoughts
you?
after all of that.
But what was your book? Did you have one, Stomping Jen?
So I can't think of any specific books because I was such an avid reader. Like I read all the time. But like I really liked, Madeline L'Engle, that whole series. I read Anne McCaffrey and the Dragons of Pern.
Oh, the Dragons of Pern.
Right.
Yeah.
Like I read, my mother, I read Clan of the Cave Bear, that whole series.
Yeah.
I was into Stephen King.
Yeah.
But it's that, like, and I just want to go back to, it's like that feeling that somebody has opened something in your brain that you didn't know was there, like a secret door into your own psyche and into like these possibilities and these worlds you didn't know about.
Yeah. Well,
like,
I read like Neil Gaiman. So like, I was really super into Sandman comics and stuff, but I was listening to you talk about like, the teen, young adult, like girl drama stuff and like, all the Sweet Valley High books.
Sure.
Like,
Sleepover Friends,
so
Sweet Valley
many
High.
of that,
And what is connecting with me now, what I'm connecting in my brain right now, as opposed to other parts of my body, like my arms. We watched this documentary last night about an octopus.
Oh yeah, My Octopus Teacher.
Yes,
Okay.
and they were talking about how the octopus has cognition in all different parts of its body. But anyways, what I'm putting together here
go ahead.
is that your books, you talk about that feeling of like your mind being blown open. And to me, that is a creative feeling in a way. And is it a coincidence that your bookstore also has this creative like element baked into it?
No, that is wholly by design.
Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. So, it's actually a very short story. I was in a position that I loved very much. A company that I really loved working for, was on the launch team for a really important, very a really admirable nonprofit dedicated to kids who have learning disabilities. I really loved my work, and it was in New York City. It was in Tribeca, and I would go down there for a week every month. And I did that for about 7 years and managed a team remotely. And I was lonely and bored and felt like I was super disconnected from the place that I lived, and I loved where I lived, and I missed my kid and I missed my partner. And I really didn't have a fallback plan, but I quit my job. And I was really serious about sort of taking that moment to pivot my career. And so I took 30 days to try to figure out what in the hell I did next. And so every day I had coffee with somebody who either was a friend of a friend or somebody kind of I knew in the community or somebody I'd sort of run across. And I just wanted to know what the women who lived here in Western Mass, what did they do for actual work? Because I think so many people here don't have like traditional jobs. I think they're cobbling together, a life and maybe a career, but maybe just a collection of jobs. And so after I had spoken to several people, it dawned on me that somebody who I had really admired the work of was my son's art teacher. Lindsay Fogg Willits was my son's art teacher. He had been taking classes with her for years. She ran this currently this incredibly popular series of kids art classes. And every time I saw her, she just looked like she loved the hell out of her work. And it was really awesome to like pick him up from this art class and get to chit chat with her for a minute. But that's all we ever did, right? Like we just kind of saw each other in passing. So I invited her out for coffee at the Florence Pie Bar here in town, owned by another really amazing female entrepreneur. And, you know, we had a slice of pie and we got a cup of coffee to go. We started taking a little stroll around the neighborhood. And I kind of dropped in this idea that I was thinking about the possibility of opening a kids' bookstore. And she didn't think it was funny at all. Like she didn't laugh. And I explained to her how I just felt like, you know, Florence in particular is a super family friendly neighborhood. It's a primarily walkable, small downtown. You see the same people all the time. And, you know, I would do these totally bonkers exercises where I would sit on the corner in the middle of downtown Florence and count strollers to see how many people, you know, did as many people live there who had children as I thought? Did they really? I mean, I could look at census data. I could look at, you know, all the actual city reports. But were people out and about and doing things? And the truth was they were. They were out and about. And so here I was on this walk with this person who had spent almost 2 decades really creating a super family intensive business. And she thought this was a great idea. And we kind of floated very casually, like, wouldn't it be cool if there was a part to this creative bookstore thing where you gave art lessons sometimes? And I lamented that, you know, it felt like retail needed to be more than just a singular thing to survive right now. It had to be more than just buying things for people, because we can get it faster and cheaper every place else. So why would I open something? What could I offer? And within, you know, 40 minutes, the two of us sort of glommed onto each other and said, we should do this. We should really put our heads together for this. Like, this could be a thing. And I would be, you know, exaggerating to say that was like the very beginning and we opened 3 months later, but that was the beginning and we opened 3 months later. And, you know, it was pretty amazing to start a business with somebody who was so incredibly thoughtful about how she had been running her own, you know, small business for so long. It's an incredible stroke of luck that the two of us found each other. And, you know, in those very early days of like deciding what we were going to do, it was just pretty amazing to have the brain power of somebody who I really respected, who I knew was respected in the community, you know, by my side. And I've got to say, like, partnering with Lindsay was my very first, you know, jump into this. And I think it was just the best possible move. It's been an awesome almost 16 months of the two of us, like, getting to know one another personally and professionally. And, you know, there's like been this small pandemic in the middle of all of it also. And so we've like, you know, watched each other's coping skills throughout. And so, you know, that was kind of the genesis, is that I met somebody who I really wanted to spend professional time with. And together, art and books really make up two of my own passions. And she is also, you know, a parent of a giant reader. And, you know, it just seemed like it was a love match. And, you know, I don't know of any other model that looks like this. There wasn't a blueprint for us to follow, but it felt right.
Yeah.
And we just kept going until it started to feel like we needed to pivot. We just kind of continued moving forward together.
Yeah, I mean, prior to the pandemic, when you had young readers in your store, and I'm really interested in this.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing is a connection between art and books. Like, what did you observe in those young readers who were exposed to art and books? Did one feed into the other in some way that you've observed?
That's a super good question. Yeah. I think graphic novels cannot be underplayed right now. Graphic novels make up the majority of the books that we sell. They're the majority of the books that I read. I think graphic novels have found themselves, they're not up and coming. They are here. They are a legitimate and beautiful and to be treasured art form that marries both narrative and art in a way that is, I think, wholly unique. And what we see is that toddlers and preschoolers and early readers and grade schoolers get it. They find this form of reading to be super captivating and really inspiring. I watched these young people go from an art class where they were, learning the basics of cartooning to then like piling up these graphic novels of artists whose work that they just so admire and so respect. And I mean, I'm a parent, you two are parents, graphic novels are candy for small people. They're incredibly appealing. And I think it's amazing. I think it's incredible. And, we would get, and we haven't had this since we've moved, but especially as we were opening our doors where the bulk of our collection is in graphic novels, I would get a family once in a while and they would say, "Don't you have any real books?" And you would just watch the face of their kiddo like fall. Like, like when your dad would tell you that your music was too loud or too noisy, right? Like there was just this generational divide in that moment. And I experienced that a couple times, but really by and large, I think families are realizing that even though their kid consumes a graphic novel in a sitting, that they return to it again and again and again, that it's like a security blanket after a while. You see girls who are toting their Raina Telgemeier graphic novels under their arms around the grade school and the middle school, and like it comes with them everywhere, and the corners get tattered, right? Like, how many books in your house have your kids loved so much that you've had to replace them? Like, how many Pokemon guides have you had that you've had to replace because they just look through it over and over and over? And I think that that's amazing creative fuel for young people. I think that it is, like a fire starter for young kids. And it's been just like an absolute joy to watch kids gravitate toward the bookshop and then stay for art classes because they were piqued by the instruction of a medium that they were interested in, or kids who came for art classes who realized that there was an entire genre. Maybe they had never heard of Wings of Fire, and then they realized that there was a dragon tribe that they needed to know about, right? Like, I think that there has just been this incredibly seamless sort of slalom between the two worlds.
Yeah. Is there something that you particularly appreciate about children's books or graphic novels or YA novels? I'm thinking about, I'm going to call it all literature aimed at children.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. I think what's, for me, young people's literature, when it does its best work, it reveals things about experiences that I've had that maybe at the time I didn't even think through the bigness or the impact or how all the pieces fit together after that experience. I think great young adult literature helps us as grown-ups sort of re-examine parts of our childhood and parts of our adolescence, especially for those of us who had super bumpy adolescences. Like, I don't know. I don't know if this was your experience as a kid, but record stores were like a slowly dying thing when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember walking into record stores. My dad would take me to a record store in New Brunswick, New Jersey. And he would just sort of let me go, right? And there were listening stations where you'd have like, lice-filled headphones that you'd plop on your head. And you just like get a little snippet of a song that made you feel something that you'd never felt before. And you were like, what in the hell am I listening to?
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot about that when I'm reading a really great graphic novel, something by Tilly Walden or Craig Thompson or Jerry Krasaska or Jean Yang, like the ability to sort of deconstruct an experience and then reconstruct it in a way that can be felt by and recognized by a young reader. I use the word magic a lot, but it feels like alchemy.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. And I think it's really powerful.
Yeah, and I'm not saying this just because you're here, but bookstores were kind of that place for me.
Oh,
when I was a
wow.
teenager, I would just go into them.
Did you have an independent bookstore by you?
No, it was like the mall.
The Walden?
Yeah,
the Walden
Sam's.
books, out
Sam's.
in the malls, and they were next to record stores. But
Yeah, Sam Goodies.
Yeah.
like I was the one kid who was like, I'll go back to Stephen King, but I was the one kid who was waiting in line for the release of the new Stephen King book, like because I was so transported into those worlds, and that's kind of where I escaped to as a child and as a teenager. Do you know when you're holding a really remarkable graphic novel? Is there something about it, or a book, or another, or even a young children's book? Like, do you know when you're holding something that is truly remarkable and potentially like timeless?
Wow, that's such a great question. I don't know that I could say that I do. I truly believe that every book has its reader. And when you're a small bookshop and you're choosing things for your store, I think for me, I have to keep in mind, literally as I'm going through catalogs or if I'm seeing authors post about their books on Instagram, like I have to think about who the kid is in our community who would really need this book. And so I just do a lot of thinking about like when I'm holding a book, who is the kind of kid who needs this? Like, what is this book? Is this the key for some kid's lock? Like, is it telling a story in a new way? Is it telling a super familiar story in a super soothing, really relatable way? Not all of the books that I love are that different or that groundbreaking. Most of my very favorite graphic novels and most of my favorite books like tell a very simple story very beautifully. Mm-hmm. And just that, like when you put on a tune and you're like, damn, this is a good tune. You could feel that same way about a book. And I wish that there was just, I wish there was something about books universally that I could tap into and say, like, that's our kind of book. Mm-hmm. But there are certainly genres that, like, I know that for my shop, we need to carry to represent the kiddos in our community.
Can I just interject for 2 seconds?
You are a co-host here, my dear. Go
so
ahead.
I think some of the magic that Lexi has brought to High Five is that curation of the selection and the ability to match a reader with a few questions. And it leads them in the right direction.
Yeah.
And,
I love that you brought that up. And Lexi, I was looking at the High Five Books website and I saw your book help page, which is like basically a kind of an online form that collects information that will help match a reader with a book. Can you tell us a little bit more about that process and
sure.
how you do that?
Yeah. I think one of the things, so we created a book recommendation form because, as a parent, we are expected to be the experts in everything that has to do with our kid. And somehow over the parenting eons, we have also had to become experts in curating all of their media for them. And that's bananas. That's totally bonkers to me that we would put the onus of finding great books on parents. Yes, your kid the best, but books are coming out so fast and the genres are so rich that I don't expect families to know exactly what it is that they could pair their kiddo up with. So our team came up with this book recommendation form, and it basically just asks you, what was the last book that your kid flipped out over? What age is your kid? And what do we need to know about your kid that would affect the kinds of books that we choose? Maybe your kid is dyslexic and for them, graphic novels are really, really tricky. And so you don't want to know anything about graphic novels. You don't care about it. Maybe you are the parent of an older kid who knows that there are some hot button issues that they cannot read about. It's just too difficult for them. So we just strike all of that. And then my team and I sort of look at the parameters that a parent or a caretaker has put on their book request. And we get to thinking through our favorites, through the shop hits, through what's on the indie bestseller lists right now. And I think, when we have that conversation in person with a kid, there's so much body language that's really easy to, discern how the conversation is going. So we always talk about what was the last thing that you read or had or heard. I myself I'm an ear listener, so I don't do much in the way of actually physically reading books. I will read graphic novels, but otherwise I'm an audiobook all the way aficionado. Is that your kid's preferred modality? If that's something that we need to keep in mind, it totally changes the conversation. But I'll also ask kids when they come into the shop, what are you watching on Netflix? What are you loving? So you love Stranger Things, and you really might like Clown in a Cornfield. Okay, so you're watching Game of Thrones. It really helps shape the kinds of recommendations we get. Mm-hmm. And you can also kind of watch kids as they kind of physically gravitate toward different areas of the shop. So if you're just hanging out for a long time in the Keeper of Lost Cities section, which is a very popular middle grade series, and I ask you have you read these? And you're like, no, it's just, I know everybody's reading them. And then I kind of can hear that you want something that you can connect with because your friends and the people around you have read, but you're not really into the thing that everybody wants. So it begins to help shape the kind of recommendation that we'll give you. And then we try to give a list of 5 to 10 books that, you might want to start with this and move in this direction. We carry books. We get shipments of books every day into our shop, but we certainly can't carry everything.
Do you feel like kids are receptive to your recommendations?
Yes.
One of the things one of the things we struggle with in our household, and I'm sure a lot of parents do, we could recommend the same exact thing, you might, and because we recommended it, there's no way in heck they're going to read that.
Right.
Yeah.
So
that makes sense.
Yeah. So,
That's right.
As an adult figure,
Ish.
So do you do feel like that the kids are receptive to the recommendations you're making?
Well, so here's the thing, like I actually am reading most of this stuff. So I actually have an opinion about most of it. And that opinion often doesn't jive with everybody else's. And, like I personally am not into fantasy. I am not into sci-fi. It's a problem. I need to get over it. It's something I'm working on. And I do have deep feelings about, specific formats. So like I can always recommend a great audiobook because I'm always listening to what I think are great audiobooks. I do think that kids care about recommendations if they get a sense that the grown-up who they're talking to like really is walking the walk if they're talking the talk.
It's true.
Yeah.
And I've watched her spin this magic with Space Unicorn multiple times.
Yeah.
And there are books that Lexi has recommended to her that she is just captivated by and wants more of. And what's the next one in the series?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Audiobooks. I have developed mostly because of podcasts, surprise, into a really auditory person. Like I love my media coming at me like primarily without visuals and with words. Do you feel there's a lot of stigma against audiobooks out there in the world of people who sell literature and even those who consume it? Okay.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think one of the things that we contend with as independent booksellers is that the biggest name in the game is Audible, which is an Amazon company. And I think we think, audiobooks equal Amazon equal bad for indies. But the truth is that there are alternatives to Audible. There's a service called Libro.fm, which is everything that you could possibly find on Audible for the most part, just not putting more fat in Jeff Bezos's pocket. And I think that if what we're valuing is the power of story and the power of good writing, then having that experience, delivered to your ears rather than to your eyes, I think that in our house, we still consider that reading.
Yeah. And if I read correctly on your website or some associated materials before the pandemic, when we could all get together, you did readings in the store, right?
Yeah, we did.
Can you talk? I want to dig in a little bit about the specialness of hearing somebody tell a story. Have you observed something special happens to a group of kids or even a group of adults when somebody sits down and reads to them?
Well, I think there's something very universal about the way that we as parents try to connect with kids around stories and around written word, right? So we read bedtime stories and we give babies books, even though babies can't read, but we read to them so that we foster this deep connection around hearing language and having reactions to the tone and timbre of voice. And then as kids get a little bit older and they're sort of captivated by the pictures that go along with stories. And we've all been in a circumstance where a kid who was way too young to learn to read has memorized their favorite bedtime book and they can recite it back to you. And there's that sort of power in the recitation of the thing that they care the most about. And that's certainly true for my own family. My own son never had a blankie or a lovey or anything, but he had these 3 books that he would carry around with him. And that was how he felt the most secure. And so, we hope in this moment where things like, library programs in schools are being cut, that we continue to bring kids together around, hearing stories. And I think the proliferation of family podcasts is a great testament to this as well, that like there's real entertainment in bringing people together and hearing stories, that these sort of kid-focused radio dramas that are being produced. And there's so many great ones, right? Like they're incredible radio stories for families. I think that that's really beautiful time spent together as a family, and it's as valuable to listen to a story that's being read to you by a person in your family as it is. I mean, especially during this pandemic, I don't know how many times we as a family have just like, instead of reading Percy Jackson next to each other cuddled in bed, as much as that's like the gold standard of how you would want a kid to consume a book, right? Someone actually reading it to them. Throughout this pandemic, what we've been doing is sitting around with a puzzle or with some perler beads on a Sunday morning and listening to podcasts together for hours. And it's like this beautiful shared experience. And I just think that that's like, it's a super underrated way to pass time, both listening to stories, but also like getting together to consume a great tale. It's just, it feels really good.
Yeah, and before we started recording, you were telling us about the solo stove you have, and and I had made a comment about how there's something primal about fire, right?
Yeah.
And sitting around a fire, and I think there's something very primal in us, baked way down into our cellular structure about hearing stories, about hearing one another, tell a tale. And and I think that it just speaks to
oral history,
speaks to a lot of us.
Well, and especially if you are right now a young person for whom your experience is finally being told in literature that is coming out right now, right? And so and that's really like where High Five tries to put the most energy, is in putting tales into the hands of kids who may not see their own experience reflected all of the time. So we sell a lot of queer books. We sell a lot of books written by and for BIPOC. And we really think that it is important for kids to feel seen in the books that surround them, but also that they are exposed to entire new worlds, literally new worlds that they couldn't possibly fathom, but maybe could feel like they're seeing a bit of themselves in them. I think that that's so important.
Yeah. And do you have offerings, or can you get offerings for people who might be visually impaired? Or
Totally. Yeah. So here's the thing, like if I do my job right, everybody who has a need for some sort of, book or story related experience knows that they can tap into us so that we can help make that finding, that sort of unearthing, a little easier. That's what we love to do.
Yeah. I noticed on your webpage that you have a way of connecting readers with authors, like local authors in our Pioneer Valley.
Which we're so fortunate.
Yeah.
There's so many of them.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Yeah. I think that we are incredibly lucky to be surrounded by this, collection of truly award-winning writers and illustrators. And I think that it's one thing for a kid to know that the Eric Carle Museum is here because Eric Carle lived here. And it's one thing for them to know that Dr. Seuss lived in Springfield. But it's another thing to take art classes with the kids of your favorite author and to sort of see them coming and going, and to know that creative pursuit is a totally valid and really respectable way to live a life. I think it's really inspiring to be in an area where we believe that, pursuing writing and illustrating work for young people is something to be admired and something to honor.
Yeah, I had a question about that. What is some of our listeners themselves might be aspiring authors or YA authors or children book authors. Do you have any advice for those folks?
I don't. I wish I did. I mean, there are really great regional writing groups and illustrating groups. I could throw out an acronym and I would get it wrong right now. But join your regional writing groups. Make sure that you're reading everything that the people around you in your area are writing. Take advantage of all of the workshops that are being put on, especially right now on Zoom. There's so much being offered by the folks who are here representing the children's book illustration and writing community. There's just so much that's being offered. Tap into our libraries, which are also doing an awesome job offering programming for young writers. We are currently in National Novel Writing Month, NaNoWriMo. Make it happen. Do it. Do it.
And it's that do it part, right? And I'm thinking about, we had Lexi, we had a guest on a few weeks back, and now an author. Her name is Sam Delory, and she was writing a children's book, which was a retelling of The Ugly Duckling for adopted children, right?
Oh, wonderful.
Called The Yell of Teddy Drake. And she came on to promote her Kickstarter for it and to tell us all about, her experiences writing the book and why she was doing it. And she got it funded.
She did.
And she is putting it out there, and like thousands of these books are going to go out to children who hadn't had any kind of representation in that space.
That's so awesome. That's so awesome.
And,
good for her.
And it just, that kind of was jumped into my mind when she just did it. I mean, her determination to tell the story and to reach the kids through her book was so inspiring. And I think it talks about the power of books and stories for children. I think. And like another thing jumped into my mind, like this memory I have of, I don't know, our son Ted, when he was maybe 9 months old, like his hands were just like was just starting to do stuff. And I remember he was sitting on my lap and I was reading to him. And I remember he reached up to turn the page and I was like, what? Like, first of all, I didn't even know he was following along with this.
Right.
Like, in the fact that he turned the page, like he may have been a year old. It was like some ridiculously young number where like I didn't think he could be like possibly understanding what was happening. But like he knew I was reading him a story and I was like saying something about the stuff on this page, and so I was just thinking about the importance of reading and reading to kids.
It's like exposing them to books too, right? Like, so, for our kids, like we read to them every night. We took them twice a year to our, biannual library book sale.
Yeah.
Let them spend as much money as they wanted on whatever they felt like they wanted. And I think about too, like, we talked about big chain bookstores, and we used to go to Barnes and Noble every weekend and just like hang out in the children's
and we knew
section.
when Ted walked up onto the little performance stage, he would have to poop. Like that was his thing. Oh, he's up on the stage. We're going to have to change his diaper.
But we used to go to the bookstore all the time.
Yeah, we loved the bookstore.
And if we had access to a wonderful independent bookstore when our kids were little,
we would have brought him
been
to
there all the
High
time.
Five books to poop.
That's it.
So
we have a great potty.
one thing I was wondering if you had any insight on was, for a lot of parents, they may be wondering, like, how do I know my kid's ready for that YA novel or that graphic novel? And do you help parents navigate that uncertainty? And can you tell us a little bit about that, like that problem parents may perceive? Like, well,
yeah, that's a great question. So most of the time it goes the other direction, where a kid says, I want to read this book. And the parent looks at me and says, should they read this book?
Mm-hmm.
And I say, well, tell me what the last book was that you read that was like it. You know, I try to get a sense of like what the family's values are. You know, if we're reading a book about, you know, most recently I was chatting with a really awesome young person who was super, super interested in a book. It was a graphic novel specifically about gender identity and coming to terms with their own non-binary experience. And it was a graphic novel for young adults. It was rated for teens 14 and up. This was a 12-year-old young person. And, you know, I literally held mom off to the side and I said, this is an incredible book. I really think it's a great match, but I'm going to show you 3 or 4 pages that I need you to be down with in order for me to hand this back to your kiddo. Mm. And in this particular case, the parent was totally for it. Felt actually really great about having this particular content in their kiddo's hand. And that's not always been the case. I have had books returned to me with some salty words about kids not being ready for it. And also like swing and a miss, right? Like, I think it's really, really hard to tell a kid that they can't read something that they're truly interested in. Mm. I think that it is also really hard to be a parent who has no time to vet everything that our kid touches. And, you know, I would say that I try to screen as much of the YouTube that my kid watches as I can, but he's definitely exposed to things that I'm not like 100% behind. That said, I feel like he might ask me if there was a portion of what he was watching or reading that he wasn't quite ready for. I think it's just so much about the conversation. Yeah,
I was going to say, and at least that book represents, you know, it has confines around it, right? Like, unlike the wide expanse of the internet, right? Yeah. Like, and you as a parent could read that book and, you know, anticipate potential discussion points and conversations. And, you know, I think that could be a really positive thing. Even though there's some things in there that as a parent might give you some worry.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah.
And also, like, parents know their kids best, right? Like, I trust that if a family says, like, sorry, I really don't want a book with abortion in it, then I'm going to say, all right, well, I'm like, so next, right? Like, and also they're the ones in most cases who are paying for these books. Let's be clear. Yep. You know, this is not a library situation. This is a sort of a retail experience. So I understand completely that if they're the ones with the dollars, that they get to decide exactly how to spend it.
Now, I noticed also on your website, I was creeping all over it this week, and it's a great website. I noticed that you have teamed up with Northampton's Interlink Publishing to launch
for Valley Book Rally.
The Valley Book Rally. Could you talk to us about that?
Totally. Yeah, Valley Book Rally was awesome. So on March 13th, you will recall, we all got the phone message from the state saying that schools were canceled, that everything was sort of beginning to shut down. And back at High Five Books in our old location, I had families coming in. We closed at, we were supposed to close at 5 that night. We closed at 7. And I had folks who would bring these piles. Like I jokingly referred to them as panic piles of books for the kids. And they, we all thought this was going to be a really long 2 weeks. So they thought they would just get as many books for these 2 weeks that we might be stuck at home. And family after family asked me, how do I get this amount of books into the hands of kids who might not otherwise be able to get them? Maybe their families can't afford it. Maybe they don't have the access to get here. What can we do? And so I chatted with my friend Hannah Mushabek, who is an editor at 2 publishing companies, but one here in Northampton. Her family owns Interlink Publishing. And we kind of came up with this idea that we needed to crowdfund as much money as we could to get kids who needed books some free books. So we quickly threw together a web page through, we threw together a Kickstarter.
GoFundMe.
GoFundMe. Yep. Thank you. Excuse me. We'll edit that. We quickly came through with a GoFundMe, and we thought that we might get a couple $100 in donations from folks. And after we hit $10,000, we realized that we were kind of on to something huge here, that people really didn't want kids to go through this pandemic without something to really sink their teeth into.
Now, is this a drive that's still open? Could people still contribute to it?
So technically the fund is still open. Yeah, we delivered our 700th book over the last holiday weekend. We finished up.
I have to give you one of these.
He's been dying to do that.
Yes, 700th book.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It was really great. And actually we teamed up with the incredible crews at Grow Food Northampton and the Northampton Survival Center. And basically what we did was we paired up with the stations where families who were receiving free groceries throughout the pandemic could also pick up free books for their kiddos. In some cases, we were just, sort of stocking tables with books that they could grab. We went and matched individual kids at different housing complexes to books based on their age. We tried to use as many local authors as we could for these book giveaways, and we also tried to use as many Interlink Publishing titles as we could. And that just felt really, really awesome. It was a win-win for everybody involved, and we are really eager to continue to listen to what families need, especially as we enter the holiday season, and then figure out a way to make some kids smile.
God, thank you. I mean, our community is so lucky to have people like you in it. I mean, as a small business owner in a bookstore, right, that is so reliant on physical presence, like I'm sure things may probably have not been the easiest during the pandemic, and to turn your energies like outward and be thinking about the kids out there who, are in need of a book during these times. That is such a beautiful thing. So thank you for doing that. I mean, that's amazing.
It was a total treat. It was so awesome to get to meet so many of these kids. It was really cool to chat with their caretakers. We have some really incredible people here in the Valley.
We were talking a little bit about the pandemic. How have you had to adapt as a physical bookstore?
Sure. Yeah. So we had to close, and we closed the bookshop on March 13th, and when it became incredibly clear that things were not going to return to normal anytime soon, my co-business partner and I had to chat about like what we needed. We have children ourselves, our kids go to different school districts, and she and I were in the same very, very small space. And we just decided that while other shops were opening back up, we just didn't feel like it was the right choice for us. And so we remained closed. We continued to do curbside pickup and local delivery. And right about the very middle of June, a for rent sign came up in our neighborhood, in a standalone building that was about a block away from our original location. And it was just so perfect. The timing was not perfect, but the location was.
Yeah.
And while our doors were closed anyway, and truly while we were basically serving as a holding ground for all of the Valley Book Rally titles that were going out, we at one point just had, a couple hundred books stacked in piles, divided up by age all over the store, which was no longer functioning as a store because folks weren't allowed in it. And we just realized we needed more space. We had to, it was going to be a real bear. We had just opened up the shop prior, 9 months prior, and we signed a new lease. And it was really, really
Wow.
terrifying. And less than 30 days later, we moved, and we kind of looked at each other in the new space. We had, we now had twice as much space, which meant we needed twice as much shelving and twice as much in inventory. And we just said, like, we'll get there.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've had a slow roll. Our shelves finally arrived a couple weeks ago. We continue to do curbside service and local delivery. As of this evening, we just announced that we are opening up to private shopping.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that on your website. Yeah. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. We have a very beautiful store that we are excited for folks to see as the general public when it's safe to do so. And until then, we are excited to invite folks in for 30 or 60-minute private shopping where the store is completely closed to anybody but you and your crew or your pod. Folks over the age of 2, we ask to wear a mask and sanitize their hands, but then otherwise I am on call to help with anything folks need. And also if they just need a quiet bookstore to page through, that's okay too.
That's awesome. We've talked to a number of entrepreneurs and, I love how inventive and resilient Stomping Jet people are.
It's true.
And Lexi is certainly fitting that description.
I mean, in fairness, I didn't have a lot of choices. So we couldn't open to the public because the governor told us we couldn't. And so we either were just going to sit on all of this inventory. I mean, on March 13th, we didn't have a website. Like we didn't have any inventory on the website. And so we put all the inventory on the website, and then that took a week. And then we just kind of, I feel like this last 9 months has just been an exercise akin to whack-a-mole, right? Like problem comes up, you try to attack it. Problem comes up, you try to attack it. And a lot of this is being reactive and not, and not proactive for the most part. But none of us really know what proactive could possibly look like right now. So the things that we could secure were a bigger space with more offering for whenever we had the next phase of life sort of open up to us. And in the meantime, I think right now as a shop and as a brand, our role is just to sort of hold this space of this time is weird. We're all trying really hard to make the most out of it as caretakers, as people who love kids and as people who love books. And maybe along the way we could have a little joy as possible.
I think that's awesome. One other thing I really wanted to ask you about was the on your website you had a section called Fundraise with us.
Yeah,
could you talk a little bit about what that is?
Sure. Yeah. So we have launched virtual book fairs. So just like the book fair that you went to when you were a kid and your mom gave you $5 and you got a paperback book and a smelly pencil. It's a lot like that, minus germs. It's all online. So we use High Five Books has a distribution partner called bookshop.org, which is an online interface that really was created to serve independent booksellers as a way of standing out from Amazon. It is really difficult to match Amazon's pricing and Amazon's speed. They don't actually make money on their books. They're doing that at a loss, and they're doing that at a loss so that they can sell their other products.
Yeah.
And for us, using a service like bookshop.org, which truly benefits indies in a way that no other platform has. So as an independent bookseller, I have a shop on bookshop.org, and that means that when you purchase through the High Five Bookshop, we get a percentage of your sale. You are directly getting your book sent straight to you from the distributor. And also Bookshop pools the funds at the end of each quarter and distributes it to all of its partner bookshops. So, everybody gets a check cut to them. It's a really beautiful service. And we're using our Bookshop service to create these independent virtual book fairs. So, we just finished one up for Pelham Elementary School.
Nice.
They were so awesome to work with, and we helped create a series of categories of books for their families that reflected their school's values and the new principals' interests. And it was really sweet. It was fun to show families the kinds of books that kids at different ages are really excited about. And we were able to cut a check directly straight to the PTO afterwards.
That is awesome.
And that felt really, really good. And all of it was virtual.
All right, so listen.
Pay it forward again.
Yeah, listen, you people.
Yes.
Our listeners.
Not me.
Don't buy books on Amazon, okay? Go to High Five Bookshops. Look there.
Yeah.
Okay, and we have a link in our
show
notes. Thank you, Stomping Jen.
You're welcome.
And we have a link. We'll have a link to Lexi's High Five bookstore. We have a link to the GoFundMe. Okay, we want people to go check out all of the links. Right?
That's right. All the links.
I'm counting 6 links.
And so many links.
Yeah, and I expect everyone to click on those links.
That's right.
All right.
Linkapalooza.
Lexi, are there, other than obviously patronizing High Five Books, are there ways that people listening to this can help with your mission and with the bookstore?
Oh, that's so sweet. So sure, shop at High Five. Also, shop everywhere that is not a chain store. Shop locally this season more than ever. We are entering a holiday season in retail that is going to be unlike any other. This is a make or break season for many small businesses. And, I challenge your listeners to try to find anything that they would buy at a big box store locally as they can. Okay. It's a wacky time, and small businesses need your love.
Right. Thank you for saying that. All right, now we're gonna ask you just a couple of questions.
Sure.
That are
not book related.
Not book related.
Maybe not book.
I think they're fun. I think they're fun questions.
Just fun.
So speaking
of
fun,
lightning round.
Yes.
Yeah, and speaking of fun, what do you like to do for fun when you're not involved with High Five Books?
I really like to read graphic novels. I really like to read. I like to read with my kid. I like to read by myself. I live in beautiful Florence, Massachusetts, so I really am into being outside and walking while listening to books and listening to podcasts. I think I remember fun from before the pandemic. Yeah. I don't cook. I'm a really big reader.
That sounds like fun to me. So
Yeah.
I when I run, I listen to podcasts
That's awesome.
or audiobooks. So
Yeah.
I'm with you on that. All right. This next question you can interpret
Okay.
any way you'd like.
Great.
What have you seen that you cannot explain? And I'm going to play some spooky music here.
Please, the spooky music. It's very loud. That's spooky
I'm
music.
going to turn it down a little bit.
Thank you.
What have you seen that you can't explain?
Wow. What have I seen that I can't explain? I mean, I never took physics. And so I can't actually explain a lot of the things that I see happening around me. What is that? Math? I think I could just say math in general. Does that work?
That's fine.
That's
Yep,
totally
that's
cool.
fine. Yeah.
Great.
No, thank you. Thank you for taking a stab at it.
Yeah.
I'm going to reveal my true motivations.
Yes.
I'm on a hunt for the mystical and the supernatural.
Yes.
And we don't always get anything.
Yes, he's wearing his new Bigfoot.
Yeah, I'm wearing a Bigfoot t-shirt that I have to give a call out to one of our listeners and a friend, Shutter Logic,
Yes.
who sent
That's
this
fun.
who sent this to me.
Yes.
So thank
Read
you.
what it says, though. It says social distancing.
Social distancing champion, Bigfoot.
And there's a picture of Bigfoot.
Yeah, Bigfoot.
Yeah, Bigfoot. Have you experienced anything paranormal lately?
Me lately? No.
Not lately.
No, but the story, the paranormal story du jour here in the Sawtooth household, in the soft serve headquarters, is about ghosts that I saw when I was a child. Yeah. So we've been talking about that a lot.
Yeah. He's on the hunt for like aliens and
Well, Stomping Jen, I think we've neared the end of this podcast.
I think so.
So let's start with first saying thank you to Lexi Walters Wright from High Five Books.
Thank you.
For coming on here and talking to us.
We so appreciate you.
Well, thanks, you too.
I learned a lot. I have a sense of deep appreciation and awe for what you're doing.
And next time we take Space Unicorn for a private shopping.
Yes.
You'll have to come along.
I will,
time.
indeed.
You should come along.
Yes.
You should come along. The second, there's a book coming out that I have in mind for her.
Okay.
It's a good one.
We'll arrange that. And to our fans, I want to say thank you for listening.
That's right.
We love you. I do, at least. I don't know about Stomping Jen. And whenever I say that, she just stares at me.
Well, because you're saying the things for both of us.
Oh.
There's no need for us both to say the things.
Okay. All right. Well, they might appreciate hearing you say it. That's all I'm saying.
You want me to say it? We love you.
And thanks for listening. And we
you.
will see
you next time.
Y'all soon, right?
On the
Stomping
flippity
Jen?
flip. Yep.
Okay. All right. Lexi, again, it was a real pleasure. I enjoyed talking with you. Stomping Jen, I know, enjoyed talking with you. Right, Stomping Jen?
That's right.
Okay.
And now we're going to say... Bye now.
Bye now.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. America knows that this world of ours ever growing smaller, must avoid becoming a community of dreadful fear and hate. Those who have freedom will understand also its heavy responsibility. That all who are insensitive to the needs of others will learn charity, and that the sources, scourges of poverty, disease, and ignorance will be made disappear from the earth, and that in the goodness of time, all peoples will come to live together in a peace guaranteed